I actually had a guy, that's what happened to him. He ended up going into heart surgery and he missed his 1031 exchange timelines and he was just out of luck. He had to pay all the taxes because all the properties he wanted to buy had been bought, sold, purchased, or closed out, or they didn't want to sell anymore. And he ended up he had to close out and pay the taxes.
I'm curious, what do you find the biggest frustration is when it comes to the 1031 exchange, Lucas, and trading properties in a marketplace where you're selling high, but then you're not necessarily being able to buy low because it's just it's hard to find deals.
I've always had issues with the 1031 because it's such a strict, the guidelines are so strict on them. And even if you pick them, if you pick like the perfect 3 properties, let's just say something like, deals, real estate deals explode every day. Like you can literally pick the perfect 3 and then have all 3 of those blow up. And then you're like, oh, well, what do I do now? I actually had a guy, that's what happened to him. He ended up going into heart surgery and he missed his 1031 exchange timelines and he was just out of luck. He had to pay all the taxes because all the properties he wanted to buy had been bought, sold, purchased, or closed out, or they didn't want to sell anymore. And he ended up he had to close out and pay the taxes. So the biggest problem with 1031s, and plus it's an equivalent exchange. So it's like, well, I have to exchange, so you have to do the appraisals and then you got to figure out, okay, is this an equivalent exchange? Do you have the money for the boot? And if you don't have money for the boot, then you got your own problems with those. So that's why you really just need to, like I was talking about before, you got to retrench and divest and figure out, well, is this 1031 the best thing I can do right now? Or because if there's enough losses and you don't have any profit on the unit, then you don't have to do a 1031 exchange at all anyway, because you've already had losses. So you just got to be careful. So I think the biggest frustrations is just the strict guidelines, and then with the market changing so heavily, it's like, I mean, what if you thought what it's worth isn't actually what your property's worth, because if it doesn't appraise, next thing you know, because I had these issues when I was now that we're talking about it, my biggest frustration is appraisers. I was trying to do a few cash out refinances and the appraisers kept lowballing me. And because I kept lowballing me, I couldn't get deals cut because they think it's only worth X and it's obviously worth Y. And you can literally get 3 or 4 out there. And, it's always a gamble on appraisers. So that's probably another really big frustration because the appraisers they're trying to figure out what the prices are just as much as anyone else, So, and like I've actually had a few issues with my cash out refinances right now because the appraisers are like, well, if the market's tanking, then we can't appraise for what it was. Like, because for example, the Federal Reserve started raising the interest rates in April. And there's now a fine line where, well, all the prices made sense pre-April, and now nothing makes sense post-April. And that's why you're seeing these giant swings in purchase prices, and the appraisers are catching wind of that. And now, so my biggest frustration right now would probably be appraisers, because because people don't realize there's such a hard line in the sand ever since they did the interest rate increase. It's like a hard line now. Because I was actually selling a house in Phoenix, and pre interest rate increase, the place was worth like $450. Post rate increase, we had to sell it for $75,000 discount because we just couldn't the demand was gone. So that was probably my biggest.
Got it. And on the 1031 front, we call that the shotgun wedding, right? Where you got to get engaged in 45 days, you got to get married in 180, and you sell high and buy higher, and it can be really frustrating, right? And in fact, we saw friends, family, and clients lose half or everything in the 2008 crash over a 3-year period here in Sacramento, California, and that's why we're really passionate, and we start Capital Gains Tax Solutions to give people an ability to eliminate the 1031 exchange, and in fact, divest without having to suffer the tax consequences, using something called a Deferred Sales Trust, and then be able to invest strategically at optimal timing, dollar cost averaging into paper assets, right? And back into real estate of their own or with partners or starting another business.